Welcome to the joint Canada-US new AtoM users group um, set of tutorials. And this particular tutorial is on the best practices for batch importing or bulk importing CSV files into AtoM. And in this particular video, I am addressing top-level descriptions. However, there is another video and set of slides that will address top level and lower level descriptions. So by top level, and with that I mean either just at your records group or collection or phone, but it doesn't include descriptions that detail lower level child levels such as series or files or items. So getting started, the first things first, and that is downloading your CSV template. So Artifactual has prepared various templates to use to be able to bulk import into AtoM, and they're available through the wiki page. The link is here on the screen, so you're more than welcome to follow that to go directly to the page where the templates are housed. And so here you're going to find a bunch of different templates for various types of activities that you can do. So among the options available are archival descriptions, authority records, accessions, bulk storage, and there's a different template for each of these things. However, today we're looking at archival descriptions. So we're going to be downloading the archival description template. And for these, they're available in two different types. So there's either the template that is for RAD, or the Rules for Archival Description, that's the Canadian Descriptive Standard, or there's ISAD-G, the International Standard for Archival Description, which are the two that are available. Unfortunately, for DAX users, there's no DAX template available, but many of the ISAD fields map well to DAX fields, and so if you'd like to use the ISAD template that way, you can also click the link here in the slide to look at the AtoM documentation for a bit more information on how to map DAX fields to ISAD fields. And then finally, once we've decided whether we're doing archival descriptions or a different type of template, and that we've picked whether we want RAD or ISAD, we also have to pick the template that corresponds with our version of AtoM. Because there are different templates over time with the different versions of AtoM, there are different functionalities, which has led to changes in the type of template for bulk uploads that you can use. So it's important to make sure that you're using the right one, the one that's most up to date in concurrence with your instance of AtoM. And so how do you check what instance your version of the database is running? And that's actually pretty simple. You just have to log in to the database with using your credentials. You can go to the admin section and click on settings. And then in settings, right near the top, you're going to have an application version, and that's going to be your version of RAD. So here in the screenshot, I don't think that's actually the version that we're running now. This is an older screenshot. We were running 2.6, and that's actually the most recent template for your archival description. So if we're picking which one we want to do, then we'll be choosing 2.6. So in this video, I'm going to be looking, for the most part, we're going to be looking at examples from the ISAD archival description CSV that's available. As you can see here at the bottom of the screen, we have an example of the template that's been opened. You can see the different columns and with their headings, as well as in every template there you're going to have two filled rows that can help give you more information about or an indication of what kind of information and data is supposed to go in each of those cells. So that can be helpful too. And you can leave those there as you're starting to fill out your CSV. Just the important thing is you need to delete them before doing your official import because you don't want to have a couple of the um, descriptions that are filled with this kind of like example stuff. And once you've downloaded the template, you can open it. So then you just need to open it in a spreadsheet, in the spreadsheet software, such as Microsoft Excel, LibreOffice Calc, or Google Sheets. My personal preference is LibreOffice Calc. I use that most of the time. That's what I started using. I have a colleague who uses Google Sheets all the time. Excel is I haven't used Google Sheets, so I don't know. I don't enjoy using Excel in CSV. I do find that LibreOffice tends to handle special characters and accents a lot better. And since some of our descriptions are in French, this just works a lot better for us. That's my personal preference, but you can kind of play around with it or try out a few different softwares and see which one you prefer. Filling in your CSV import sheet. So there's a bunch of different columns with data that you need to fill in. We're going to get started with the first two that are the most critical, and especially the first one in the case of top level descriptions. So we're going to start at the beginning. And just to say so AtoM archival descriptions that you can upload into the database, they mirror archival practice by using hierarchies. So you would have your records groups or collections or foam at the top level, and then you can have child level descriptions underneath in a hierarchy. So your series, your files, your items. And these first few columns here that I've circled, the legacy ID, parent ID, and qubit parent slug, you can't see the whole title of that one. Those columns are important to determine what the hierarchies are of the descriptions that you're working on. Because right now in this particular slideshow, we're only addressing importing top level descriptions, you can ignore parent ID and qubit parent slug, but the legacy ID column, super important. The simplest option for this when you're creating a new import and a new CSV document is to simply number each row in numerical order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on and so forth. The most important part for that, and the thing that you really need to remember, is that you have to be sure that each row has a unique number in the legacy ID column. So you cannot have two rows that are identified with the number 26, for example. There is one exception to this rule, and that is when you're including translations. We're not going to get into how to do this, but just to let you know that uploading translations at the same time with your bulk upload is an option, which is awesome if you're a repository that works in multiple languages. For us, it's French and English, and so it's really great to be able to upload both of the versions at the same time. And in those cases, our legacy IDs, we would have two columns. We would have each number would appear, each row would be numbered twice with the same number in order for that to work. But that's really the only exception. Otherwise, you have to be absolutely sure that there is a number in every single cell for the legacy ID column and that none of them repeat, because this will cause a failed import. So you want to avoid that whenever possible. And as I tell everybody whenever I do these things, I have made literally all of these mistakes. So that's how come I can tell you about what not to do, because I've done all the wrong things already. Next, just a small note about parent ID column. This is used to identify hierarchies within your data. Leave this column blank, however, for top level only descriptions. All right, so now we're on to general best practices for your CSV imports and some of the overall things to keep in mind as you're filling out these columns. First off, it's not necessary to fill out all of the columns. You can leave some blank if you don't need to use them all. Sometimes you can look, we open up one of the templates and there are so many columns and it's overwhelming to think that you need to fill out every single one. You don't. However, there are a few fields that must be filled out in order for the bulk import to work properly. First of all, that is legacy ID. We've touched on that a little bit already. There's identifier, the title column, level of description, and culture. Identifier and level of description, you could probably get away with not using perhaps, but I strongly recommend it. However, really title and culture are absolutely key. And also, if you're working in a multi-repository instance of AtoM, the repository column should also be filled in. Because otherwise what happens is if you haven't identified what repository all your descriptions belong to and you're working in a multi-repository instance where perhaps you don't have access to everybody's descriptions, you only have access to yours, once you upload them, they disappear into to like kind of never land because you don't have access to see them because they're not attributed to your repository. So it's key to remember to fill the repository in. It's also recommended that you fill in extent and medium, scope and content, language, script, publication status, event dates, event types, and then event start and end dates. Again, these are not absolutely critical, and each institution is going to establish its own preferences for minimum archival description. So, I mean, go ahead with what your institution prefers in that case. But just to note that there are some things that have to be filled in if you're going to do a bulk import, and then other things that are, recommended but not necessary. Now we have archival descriptive standards related columns. So a lot of the columns that you'll see in any of the templates for archival description, whether it be ISAD or RAD, are going to be columns that map to fields in descriptive standards for archives. And to help guide you, so perhaps if you're not sure which field a particular column is mapping to, and you want to make sure that you put the right information in the right place, to help guide you whenever you download a template from the AtoM site, each field in those example fields that you'll see below, they've put in the relevant corresponding rule for the descriptive standard that you're using. So you can think, okay, archival history, what do they want in that? And then you can go and look at ISAD 3.2.3 and look to see what is supposed to go in that field according to that particular descriptive standard. And it's the same thing with RAD. They have the references in the template for you, which is very helpful. Another note as you're working through your CSV, you can delete unused columns from your CSV spreadsheet without affecting the bulk upload functionality. Of course, as you know, if we think back to the slide just before, you can't delete legacy ID columns, or there's certain like critical ones that need to be there, but perhaps you know that you're never going to use the acquisition column or the appraisal column, for instance. Appraisal is probably one that's less likely to be used. You can delete that right out of your spreadsheet. So all of your information will be closer together. It will be less overwhelming to have all of these extra columns and feel the need or to always be thinking, oh, do I need to fill this one out or not? Then you can just work off of the fields that you actually use in your institution. And then I just have a link for some more information about the standards columns and how those work in AtoM with the template. Now there's a few sort of tricky columns or ones where we're more likely to make mistakes with the template. And so these are just some of my best practices for some of those trickier columns. The controlled vocabulary columns. Anytime the data in a column is something that would appear in a drop-down list in the user interface, if you're thinking about entering things in your browser user interface, and you might click on level of description, for instance, and a drop-down list appears, and you're picking from one of those options. Anytime there's controlled vocabulary like that, you have to make sure that the data that you, or the terms that you put into your cells in your CSVs, that they match what's already available from your list that you would see in a drop-down list, for instance. If you happen to misspell something, for example, if again, I'm using level of description, if you happen to put files as your level of description instead of file, it won't recognize the term that you already have in your controlled vocabulary for that area, and it will create a new term called file. So, and this is especially tricky sometimes if you're working with subject access points and place access points. Excuse me. So those are always the things that you need to be thinking about when you're using some of those controlled vocabulary columns. As another note, it's always possible to add 2 or more different data values in these cells. They have to be separated by a vertical line, also known as a pipe. And it's really important that there are no spaces appearing between one term, the pipe, and the next term. And then I just have a little tip of how to find your vertical line on your keyboard. It's shift and backslash keys typically. So here's other tips for some specific columns. For the language columns, they're using language codes, and then for the script and script description columns, they're going to be using a 4-letter ISO script codes, and just make sure that you're getting the right codes that you need for these particular columns. And there's some links to the ones that are available. Just as as an example, for us, it's EN for English, FR for French in our language and language of description and culture. And then in the script columns, it would be Latin, which is LATN, which is applies to both French and English. So those are some tips of where to find that information. In your culture column, this must be filled in, otherwise your input will not work. And just be careful that, make sure that the language that you're putting in your culture column is the language that you're using for your description. So especially if you have, like if your repository is or your descriptions on the database, AtoM database, or multilingual, you have to make sure that you're telling, if you're doing the description, archival description in English, that you're telling it that the culture is in English, so then it will add it kind of to the right side of your database. And then finally, the repository column. This is only applicable in multi-repository instances. And so this column must be filled out for your top level descriptions. Double checking your data before importing. This is always important. It helps avoid failed imports. There's just a few tips. If you're uploading through your browser user interface, limit the rows of each of your CSVs. There doesn't seem to be a hard limit on the number of rows that it will import before timeout. Kind of a safe number is about 200. You can always get away. You could probably get away with more, but because there's no hard number, I can't recommend anything specific to you. So just be cautious when making a bulk upload that is many rows. that you don't want to have the browser and import timeout on you. For any columns that have controlled vocabulary, really just make sure there's no spaces that you can't see hanging at the end of the data value that you've put in. So let's say if you put in EN for your language, you wouldn't want it to have EN space because then it will fail to recognize it properly. Also make sure, check your spelling for all of these things, because if it's controlled vocabulary and you spell it wrong, it will not recognize it, and then it will create sort of duplicates or almost duplicates in your, let's say, subject access points. If your term is cars and you put car, it's not going to work. It's going to create a new access point called car to go with your cars. And you don't want to, it's no fun to have to clean those up, especially if it's linked to a number of different descriptions. I've had to do that as well. After your bulk upload, it's also good practice to keep your uploads Excel or your CSV files. So that way, if you need to go back and update the information in bulk, you can simply edit the upload file and then re-import it. So that's really handy. And so just to keep that in mind. Importing your bulk upload to AtoM. Finally, we've got everything filled out and ready, more or less. AtoM now offers a CSV validator function as part of its interface. This will check your CSV upload file for critical errors that could cause your upload to fail or can cause major errors in your database functioning. I have also done all of this. It is really unpleasant when you basically, not ruin, but if you really mess up a large foam or a large collection with many child level descriptions, then you have to get somebody to fix it for you, which is not the most fun ever. On just to show you where it is, there's like the import function panel at the top of your screen if you're logged into your instance of AtoM, and then on the import button you can see different options. So there's XML, CSV, SKOS, but then also validate CSV at the bottom. So this is the CSV validator. And then just at the right, I purposely put a CSV through that I knew should fail if I were trying to bulk upload it. Just to see if the validator would catch the errors that I had put in there, and it did. I had left a legacy ID blank, and I had left a culture cell blank, and it did make note of those. So then I would need to go back and find those in my CSV and correct those before uploading. Finally, the last step in the process, to import your bulk upload into AtoM, you go to Import, select CSV, select the type of import you're doing, so in this case an archival description, and then select the update behavior you want. For new uploads, choose ignore matches and create new records on import. For CSVs that are updated versions of uploads you've already done, so if you're choosing kind of the update option for your bulk uploads, then you can either choose update matches ignoring blank fields in CSV, or delete matches and replace with imported records. There are various advantages to either of these, and so it sort of just depends on what your situation is. And then you can further ignore what they're matching to a specific collection. So that kind of makes it feel a little bit safer that they're not deleting, software isn't going to delete random things accidentally elsewhere in your database. And then so finally, select your file, your CSV file, and then import it. And that's the end.